Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm very excited for today's conversation. And it's something that TJ and I have been in conversation about a lot, I feel like, this week. So we're going to be discussing the power of I am along with confirmation bias. What is it? What does it create? Where does it come from? What can we do with it? So those are going to be the themes of our conversation today. But TJ, perhaps we could start with a little bit of grounding, a little meditation to kind of kick it off.
Thank you. Absolutely. And I also am just really incredibly grateful that we're going to be in this important conversation. And I say important because it's been emerging in just about every conversation I've had over the last 2 weeks. So we've talked about doing a show on confirmation bias for a while. So with that, wherever you are, for everyone watching, if it's appropriate for you in this moment, I invite you to gently close your eyes. And we begin by taking a nice deep conscious breath together. And on the exhale, simply allowing ourselves to bring our full attention to this very moment. Simply giving ourselves permission to arrive fully into an awareness of the here and now. So we set the intention for our time together today to be open and receptive and guided by inner wisdom, knowing that this conversation emerges from the essential beingness that we are, and it is received by you, the listener, the watcher, in that same way as we connect in this incredible medium that technology brings us, the ability to connect deeply with spirit and with each other from that place of our true nature. So knowing that this is already done, we simply step into the infinite possibilities of now. And we simply take a few moments in the silence to anchor that truth. And then allowing ourselves to bring our awareness back into this time and space and gently opening our eyes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, TJ. I'm going to go ahead and minimize the Facebook. Okay. So we've got a couple of big topics that we're going to cover today. I think it would be it feels right to start with the power of I am, and then transition into confirmation bias. How does that land with you?
It sounds great, and my guess is that they'll both interweave and intersect in a perfect way in our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So the power of I am is really something that is so fascinating and equally confusing to me. Of course, like I love affirmations. I love the power of the affirmation. And whenever I get into an affirmation or whenever I think about affirmations, my ego tends to chime in and say, well, affirmations aren't anything without effort and work and all this other stuff. And I notice for myself that the way the lens through which I view myself often reflects how I'll view other people, how I'll view things in my life. And in that vein, through that perspective, we can recognize that the way we speak to ourselves has maybe more of an impact than we would think.
Yeah, and I love that you're speaking right to it, because when we use affirmations, we can be declaring, right? So I grew up in New Thought, and we talk about decreeing and declaring that which we want to manifest, right? So when I first started using the power of I am, I was, as you said, kind of doing it from my ego, right? So like, I want to create or manifest a new house or a partner or, a new work situation. So I would decree, I am prosperous in every way. I open fully to my abundance. I am source energy. I am abundant. And I realized somewhere along the line that depending on what place I'm coming from, or the frequency I'm coming from, that can be an egoic structure. And what happened for me, interestingly enough, is it worked, even coming from ego, right? Like I wanted to create the house on the hill, and I wanted to create the beautiful partner. And I mean, all the things that I wanted, I created the new Lexus, all of that. And I did the vision boards, and I did the power of I am. But what happened for me is that I got all of that, and then I realized it didn't change anything. And the reason that's important is there was a shift that began to happen for me when I realized that the power of I am is really declaring, and declaring does not mean we declare it and the universe responds, because that's like sort of the ego way in my experience. And I'm really, honestly, I'm only speaking for myself from my experience. When I decree it from there or declare it from there, I'm wanting the universe to align with what I'm saying. But when I tap into my essential beingness and recognize the power of I am truly as I am that I am one with source energy. And there's a paradox. Once I'm there, I don't really need to claim anything because it's just infinite, right? There are infinite possibilities. But what we do, or what I do, is when I'm deeply rooted in being, and what I mean by being is that source energy, some might call it God self, true nature, Buddha nature, all the different terms we use for it. When I'm coming from that place, it's like the power of I am reminds my mind of a greater reality than the narrative I've been carrying around. So, mine were, I'm not lovable, I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough. And so if I'm only coming from ego, I look in the mirror and say, I am lovable, I am lovable, I am lovable. But if I haven't tapped into the deeper emotional work and then ultimately tapping into that essential nature, I'm not going to believe it. So I might push back against that. It's not that it's not useful, because even that can be very powerful. I think it's really popular in today's culture to talk about rewiring the brain. I think, Jeremy, I think you millennials call it a mind shift, right? Or a mind hack. And I love that, but we're talking about something much deeper than that here.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up, because when I think about the power of I am, it is more of, at least my understanding of it is, it's less of action. It's less about the words we use, and more about the vibration or the frequency that we're in. And so I know for me, culturally, there is this really, it's really prominent theme culturally, especially for people my age, the dominate, crush it, grind culture, where so much of the attention is on the do. It's on action. What do? We go out there and we do all these things, so that then after doing all these things, we can be something else. And so for me, when I think about the power of I am, it's more of a focus on the being, on who am I here to be. And if I can really channel my energy towards that, then the actions kind of follow much easier. It's almost like it kind of naturally happens versus me trying to, bring something into existence rather than allow it to exist, if that makes sense.
Well, absolutely. You're speaking to it so perfectly, because in the doing, when we're only in the doing, we do get some great results. There is nothing essentially or inherently wrong with the mindset shift or the crush it or any of that, because that can be really useful. But it's also incredibly limiting, because we might, as I did, those will work and we get to create everything, and then we might have the experience, oh, it didn't really change anything, or we might get mixed results, right? We might wonder why we are crushing it every day but the result isn't turning into what we want. So what we're talking about is getting into our, what I call the original frequency or the original vibration. And that's the vibration of the universe, right? We're in this infinite space, and quantum mechanics is now showing us all the different possibilities that we can have all these different realities. And now we're even examining that they could be happening at once. We're starting to experiment with that. We know the particles can be in two places at once. Lean into that for a moment, right? So there are all these different possibilities. When we're in that frequency, as you said, Jeremy, it becomes less about the doing, and then life comes to me with ease and grace. That's the paradox, right? When I unplug from this belief system, BS belief system, that once I get there, I will be happy. Now, the ego is going to do that. I was hoping it would go away. That's really what I was hoping. But for me, and again, this is only for me, it's still there, but I recognize it's not who I am. And I've come to recognize and understand, when I listen to the deep, essential truth, what gets created from there is so much different. And also, the other thing is, it's energizing. Our vision, or our messages that come from vision, are always bigger than what our mind could create. And I don't necessarily mean bigger by more. It might be, but it could be bigger in our consciousness, like, oh, this is so much more love than I could imagine. This is so much more oneness. This is so much more prosperity, whatever that is. But when we come from vision, the key is we have everything within us to fulfill the vision. We don't have to become something in order to manifest it. We simply rest in that vibration. And there is action, right? So we can talk about that more, but the action isn't the first step. And I think that's the key.
Right. Yeah. And I love that. And, for me, conceptually, it's really hard. It is such a deep concept about the vast, this huge landscape internally, this infinite space, or this this deep space that we have, where our essential being really lives. And one thing that's been really helpful for me is like recognizing that while my ego needs or wants the answers, it wants the action to-do list, it wants to get fired up and motivated and inspired, there's this deeper part of myself that does not need that in order to produce the results I need or want. And so what I've recognized to be true for me is that while I recognize my ego saying, like, I need motivation, I need inspiration, we need to do these things in order to get these results, I let that tape play out, all while knowing that if I can sit in the silence and just be, especially with like a situation or a problem or something I'm really trying to solve, when my ego mind is the one trying to solve it, I come up with all kinds of crazy answers or solutions or to-dos. But when I sit in the stillness and tap into, okay, who am I really here to be? What is really trying to emerge from who I am, not what I do? And when I communicate lovingly to that part of myself, because honestly, for the longest time, I would shut that out. I would shut it out and say, like, like, it's just a pipe dream. It's just fantasy. Like, that's not what you're meant to do. And like, that's not your purpose and things like that. But really the ultimate truth is allowing the ego to say all those things and say, okay, thank you for that. While knowing that this deep, deep part of myself, the essential truth of who I'm here to be, is when I tap into that frequency, it allows me to then fulfill all these other things without really much effort, because I'm coming from a place of truth to who I am.
Yes. And when some people hear us talking about this, because people will ask me, so are you saying you just sit on your sofa and wait for everything to come to you? And there's a paradox again, yes and no, right? So the first step is to, well, that's not actually true. The first step, I think, is to examine our core false beliefs and making peace with the past, right? We have to clear away what stands in the way of us being able to access that inner wisdom. Because as you said, it can be really scary for people because we've been programmed to believe we are our thoughts. And so I remember when I was first doing this, I was like, oh my gosh, if I tap into that, what if it tells me to like move to an ashram in India and spend the rest of my life meditating at the top of a mountain? So I was terrified of that because what if that's what inner wisdom tells me? Well, so far inner wisdom hasn't told me that. But what inner wisdom has told me is all of these amazing things that were greater than what I could imagine. And in order to be able to create a space to listen, to be present with, because learning how to trust it is down the road. Right now, we're just going to learn how to even recognize it's there, because someone watching might say, I'm not sure what you mean, right? And Jeremy, I'm sure that you've heard this. People say, what do you mean by true nature? What do you mean by essential beingness? So for me, the work of creating the space, I used to use the analogy of a canvas. Now I use the analogy of a movie because I've created an acronym. But the M and the O are making peace with the past and overcoming core false beliefs. And that's where this ties into confirmation bias, which we can talk about in a while. But I have to first make peace with what's happened in my past, not from a good, bad, right, wrong paradigm, but from a I'm not at peace with this, and that is creating my past, living in the present moment. The only past that actually exists is the past in our mind, because I have a story about what happened, but someone else has a different story about what happened. So we literally have different pasts based on the seemingly same situation, right? So once I understand that, then I can start asking myself the question, do I want to be at peace? Do I enjoy conflict, right? What does conflict bring me? I used to enjoy conflict, but I didn't know I enjoyed conflict. We are a house with 4 rooms: physical, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual. If you need an acronym, it's PIES. I love that. And many of us focus in the physical realm. That's what you're talking about. Crush it, dominate, make 10 phone calls today, redo your website, learn that, that formula that whoever taught everyone on LinkedIn, the formula of the 3 emails and how many days they come apart, how many days apart they are. It's like everyone went to that same workshop on how to send that drip, right? I think that's what it's called. But there's more to it than that. And then, a lot of us are recognizing the power of the mind. Oh, I can start to change my story and change reality. And that's where the I am starts to come in. But the other piece that's so important is I need to do the emotional healing work, because if I don't do the emotional healing work, the emotional response to this bigger vision for my life, I will block it unconsciously because I don't believe I deserve it. We only create the life we believe we deserve, but only 100% of the time. And then once we've done a lot of that clearing, then we say, oh, there is this place within me. Then I can start cultivating a relationship with that, which is time in the silence, aware of that energy. I know you and I are a big fan of Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth. And I'm going to paraphrase because I haven't read it in a while, but he talks about getting in touch with the energy field beneath the skin. I love that, right? We're a frequency, we're an energy. And that core frequency has always been there, but we've put all this crap on top of it. Family taught me this, the church taught me that, kindergarten made me believe that. So it's not about learning how to raise our vibration. That to me isn't the way to frame it. It is recognizing the original vibration is in there somewhere. What do I need to unlearn so that I can remember who and what I am? And when I tap into that, everything changes. What I called reality changes. Eckhart Tolle says, once we recognize illusion is illusion, it begins to dissolve.
Yeah, that's absolutely beautiful. And it's really fun to experiment with that. And I know there's a video on Facebook that you shared with me. I think it was yesterday, actually, about the power of I am and how the way that we look at ourselves, the way we communicate to ourselves, has a lot more of an impact than maybe we give credit to. And so I know for me, like you touched on briefly, the core false beliefs play such a huge part in what we manifest. There was a long time where I believed my worth in dollars was a certain amount. And I would tell myself, like, that's what you're worth. That's what you contribute. And it continued. It stayed the same for years because the way I talked to myself was, well, you're not worth more than that. You're not this, you are not that. And as soon as I started maybe questioning the way I talk to myself, and because it's almost kind of a joke, like self-talk and like the way we're mean to ourselves. I've been in groups where it's like, I want you to sit across from someone and tell them the stories you tell yourself. And it's so impossible because of how brutal it is. And it's almost like this uncomfortable laughter always follows it. It's uncomfortable laughter of like, oh yeah, like I'm super mean to myself, but the truth is that lens, the framework through which we see ourselves or, communicate with ourselves is really just infinitely powerful. And so I'm wondering if you have perspectives or insight as to what we can do to really channel the power of I am and what that looks like.
Yeah. So there are 3 steps: awareness, awareness, and awareness, right? First, being aware of how I'm talking to myself. And what you're referring to is an exercise that happens in one of the conscious recovery groups in the outpatient curriculum, where we invite clients to sit in front of each other and basically externalize the inner critic. And it's powerful because when I hear it coming at me, because it feels like it's coming at me from someone else, I'm aware of the impact it has on me. Now, we're talking about the critical voice. So if it's true that the inner critic has the power to diminish our sense of well-being or our spirit or our frequency, right? We're tuning into the frequency of brokenness instead of the frequency of unharmability. I am unharmable. When I tune into that frequency of brokenness, it creates brokenness in my life. Because again, I think it's profoundly simple. A lot of times people will say, what we attach our I am to is what we become. Absolutely. I hear people say, though, what we attach our I am to is how the universe will respond. That may be true. And even deeper, it's how I'm really in relationship with self. So once I'm aware, what we want to be aware of is the impact of it, the felt sense, what happens to myself when I say I am prosperous, I am open, I am loving, I am kind, I am on purpose, I am forgiving. And that video you're referring to, it's funny, I listened to it on repeat yesterday for a half an hour. It's 2 minutes. And if we can listen to that every day for 2 minutes, at least once, we can start getting in touch with what gets created. We have a Facebook group called the I Am Process, and that video is pinned on it. So check that out, everyone, because I mean, if each of us can just dedicate 2 minutes to the power of I am, and again, I use the term decree and declare, but not in the way of magic happens, but letting myself know the greater truth, right? In New Thought teachings, like, for example, we use affirmative prayer. We're not praying for anything. We are reminding ourselves of the truth, reminding ourselves of the infinite possibility, reminding that we're not our body, we're not our thoughts, we're not even our emotions, we're essential beingness. And that affirmative prayer process is reminding maybe our ego mind who we really are, what we really are, that we are unharmed and unharmable. And again, I really get practical with this because it's really painful living the other way. And I don't create what I want in my life. The other thing about vision that I want to touch on is it always serves other people too. I'm
Mm-hmm.
always a more beneficial presence on the planet when I know who I really am. When I believe I'm broken, I'm struggling with the world. I might even be fighting against. That's probably the bridge to confirmation bias, actually. So
Mm-hmm.
I'll let you do that, Jeremy.
Yeah, it's not a difficult segue. We've been talking a lot lately, this week specifically about the way we view the world, and I feel like it's been a big topic of conversation recently, and it stems from our landscape politically. It's our social landscape right now with the Black Lives Matter, with racism, with the election coming up, with COVID, the maskers, and the anti-vaxxers, and the anti-thisers, and the anti-thaters, and it's just like this saturation of other than that we've been really kind of curious about. And a big part of that is projection, the power of perception, and the relationship between how we perceive the world, how we choose to see the world, and the way in which that perception changes how we are in the world. Right. And it is kind of a sticky conversation. It can be, because obviously there are a lot of emotions around stuff like COVID, around stuff like politics.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about that too, about where those emotions come from and kind of what we can do with them. But perhaps what we could start with is just fundamentally through maybe a spiritual lens. What is confirmation bias? What is it really?
So confirmation bias, simply said, is I have a belief system or a point of view, and because of that, I find evidence to confirm what I believe, right? And it is real. So I want to be really clear. We're not saying that this isn't real. What we're seeing, right? The politics, the racism, the COVID situations, because that's what the human mind wants it to be, either that or that. So when we start exploring the topic of it's not what's happening, it's what you call it that creates how you see the world, sometimes the mind will be challenged. Well, what do you mean? Because like I have someone that occasionally posts on my Facebook, I agree with you, but. Right. Mm-hmm. I agree with you, but. And I was trained really early on, the truth always follows the but. Mm-hmm. So listen to what comes next. And he said, but we are living in a time where it's important to call out evil, where it's important to call out what's wrong with the world. And so what I want to start with is yes, and. And the yes, and to me is vital. And it's also profoundly simple. Mm-hmm. What does it create when I'm calling someone out? Because there is someone else seeing the exact same situation from the other side or another point of view. And then there are millions of people that see it in the area, in the shades of gray, which often gets lost. Mm-hmm. In other words, if I have a bias, and it's usually unconscious, or a conclusion, that's the way I like to use it, a conclusion, then I'm going to see it everywhere, right? So let's take COVID, for example. If someone has a conclusion that this is a scary, deadly virus and it's not safe to go outside, right? Because that's all over the media, right? So if that's my conclusion, I will see that everywhere. Every news report, every article, I will find experts to agree with that. And again, I'm not saying that it's wrong. It's not wrong information. It's just that I will bend toward hearing what aligns with my conclusion. If my conclusion about COVID is, yes, it's a virus, yes, it's killing people, and that's not the whole story. I have a powerful immune system. I know how to follow guidelines, take care of myself, and know who I am as a powerful, infinite being. See, the fear breaks down the immune system, right? So if I have that bias, then I'll see that too. Mm-hmm. So if I have the bias, for example, that this virus is deadly and it's killing, everyone, which of course is not true. Let's just break that down. It's not killing everyone. Of course, people are dying. We're not being insensitive to that. But the reality of life on planet Earth is there is disease, there is violence. So far in our consciousness, all of that exists. If I have a deeply held bias that the world is a scary place, I will see it everywhere, including COVID. And if I believe that very deeply, I will find all the evidence to support that conclusion. This is the key, though. When I believe that, then I'm going to judge people who aren't taking it seriously, or I'm going to judge someone. I once said to someone, all I want to do is question everything I hear. I just want to question it. I'm not saying it's wrong or right. And someone said, oh, you're one of those conspiracy theorists. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but what I'm saying is all that we know is not all there is to know. That's, of course, in Miracles says that. And the way we work with confirmation bias is instead of accepting it as the ultimate truth, we question it. So I know that was a lot, but I just wanted to kind of, explain my experience of confirmation bias. And of course, we can talk about how it is dangerous, because I think it can be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like you mentioned, and I really want to make sure that we're clear that we're not trying to be insensitive to the realities we're living, and the focus of this curiosity around confirmation bias is really it's to offer a perspective that can not, what am I trying to say? Our curiosity around it is not to say anything is not valid or to invalidate anyone's experience, rather to offer a perspective spiritually, perhaps, that can hopefully allow for more peace internally. And that's really where what I'm recognizing with confirmation bias and with everything that's happening is that it's a fight. Everything is seemingly a fight. It's this or that. And it's never black and white. It's just not, because as human beings, we have different experiences. Like you said, we can witness the same thing and ask each other about what we witnessed and get two completely different answers.
Yeah.
And for that reason, this fight feels very futile to me. It's not me versus you. It's not my opinion is better than yours. It's an opinion. It can't be wrong.
Yeah, and the key here, and I love that you just said it can't be wrong, or it's 100% correct based on my point of view. The key, and I want to be clear about something, the mind gets into the debate. Someone listening or watching right now might be in the debate of like, what is this they're saying, right? What I want to invite in a very simple way is the question I always ask myself: what does it create? What does it create when I have a perceived other and I believe I'm on the right side of the conversation and therefore you're on the wrong side? What does it create? Because fighting against has never worked. There's a if I hang my well-being on who's in the White House, I will suffer. Every 4 years or every 8 years, I will suffer. Right? And imagine for a moment that most of us haven't met the president. Some people have, but let's imagine we haven't met her or him or them. I'm literally attaching my well-being to someone I'll never meet. Now, again, someone might be like, but it is important. The Supreme Court, the policies, yes, and what does it create when I fight that? So I'm not saying, you're not saying we don't have a point of view or we don't want to stand for something, but there's a huge difference in standing against and standing for. Roughly 26% of the people, for example, voted for Donald Trump. 26% of registered voters. Now, whether you're against him or for him or neutral with him, what gets created? Let's say you're a person that's against him and you're fighting. What about the 75%? Right? What might happen if you stand for your truth instead of against? Mother Teresa said that. Gandhi said that. So many people have come to say that. Martin Luther King Jr. I mean, they're just person after person. Lao Tzu, 3,000 years ago, said the greatest gift we can offer the world is that of our own transformation. When I'm at peace with me, I can be at peace with you. And then someone might say, well, that's so like, how does anything change? I think that's the only way it does change, because the fighting and the right and wrong, good, bad paradigm keeps us stuck. It keeps us stuck in an egoic way of being.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I love that you brought it up as part of the ego mind, because I know I am not powerful enough to change anyone's mind.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I can offer perspectives, but at the end of the day, the only person that can change my mind is me. I cannot change anyone's mind about anything. And this attempt at the fighting I see on Facebook, and the reason I'm so constantly curious about it is because I feel like it is ineffective. I can't go on social media. If someone thinks Trump is the best thing that ever happened to this country, and he writes, Trump is the best thing that's ever happened to this country, and I go on there and I go, no, he's not. What happened? What changed? What improved?
Everyone changed their mind. Everyone saw, oh yeah, you're right.
Yeah. And so for that reason, what I see is just one person's ego fighting another person's ego. Right. And as long as egos are fighting this battle, nothing will change. And there are a lot of really compelling arguments that politically things really haven't changed in a very long time. And I really, I can't remember if it was Aristotle or, it was one of those guys. And they said that societies have the government they deserve.
Yeah.
And obviously that is a little bit provocative, but what I resonate with is when it comes to our voice, when it comes to creating change and shepherding new eras and awakening the divine feminine and putting an end to systemic racism and all these things that we're after right now. What I like to do is picture myself, and I say, okay, if I fight someone in the comments on someone's post that I don't even know, and there's all these strangers and I'm just fighting with them, first, what it creates inside me is a feeling of anger, hatred, and judgment. I feel a very visceral physical reaction, as though my body is here to fight, even though I'm just typing. Okay. Yeah. So that's physically what it creates. Emotionally, when I walk away from it, I'm pissed. I feel helpless. Like I didn't do anything. And so, what I've been really trying to do and look at personally is, rather than writing posts and comments, I say to myself, okay, what is it that I disagree with? Are there ways in which I've exhibited this behavior before myself? What if I have these unconscious biases that I need to work on? I'm certainly, commenting and posting on Facebook is not inner work. That's external. Yeah. And I think, yeah, go ahead.
No, keep going. I love it.
Yeah. And so just to wind it down, it's like, to me, the effort, my intention is to offer support. I feel like when I write a comment, I'm trying to accomplish something. I'm trying to feel like I did my part. And what if doing my part is being open to all sides, being open to all opinions? Of course, I'll form my own, but rather than fighting this guy, being open and listening with compassion and empathy, recognizing that behind the keyboard of that person on Facebook is another human being, and the work that needs to be done to really foster change is inside. It's internal.
Yeah, so I have there's so much I can say about it. And I'm going to go two different directions. I'm going to say it out loud so I remember to say them both. We're going to talk about what about Hitler, because I promise you, anytime I've spoken and done Q&A, when we talk about this, someone will say, what about Hitler? So I'm going to address it. I want to absolutely address it. But before that, I want to talk about what it means to be open-minded, right? And, I live in San Francisco, and I'm going to guess if you did a survey of San Franciscans, they would say we're really an open-minded place. We're, open to different people. I heard Marianne Williamson, who's now my friend Marianne Williamson, but before then I didn't know her, but she spoke to a pretty small group in Berkeley. And she was on her roll, she gets on her roll, and then she does Q&A, and she's brilliant at Q&A. And someone asked a question about what we do about the Republicans and the other party. And she said, she paused. Okay, Berkeley, you say you're so open-minded until it comes to someone that has a differing point of view. And then are you open-minded? And does the politics of resistance really work? And again, if someone's watching, we're not saying, we're just going to give up and not stand for anything. But what we're saying is it true that I'm so open-minded, or am I open-minded with people that agree with me? And then the perceived other side is the same, and they have a whole narrative, and that's the confirmation bias, right? And so I'm going to break it down, and we're going to do the what about Hitler, right? First of all, Hitler didn't do that. Thousands of people did that, right? And it's easy to point to that one person. Now, of course, he was the head of that and got that going. But the confirmation bias that he planted in people's minds were groups of people were inherently different or less than, including Jewish people, including liberals, including intellectuals, including artists, including gays, right? Roughly half the people that died in the Holocaust were Jewish. The other half were some of the other people I mentioned. So through a narrative of telling people that these people were less than, that they weren't human, right? We saw that with slavery in our country. These aren't human beings, they're property, right? And so that narrative gets told enough where people believe that, they have the confirmation bias, these people are evil or bad or wrong, and then moving into that, the horror of the Holocaust is just one simple step, actually, right? And so let's look at, for a moment, race, because it's a hot topic, and you and I are white guys. So even a year ago, I didn't think it was mine to talk about, but I have been schooled, and I'm grateful that I have been. And let me tell you what I mean by that. I think we are the ones that need to have the conversation too, because what I've noticed on social media is a lot of my white friends calling people out for being racist. So, okay, for myself, I realized that what I needed to do, instead of pointing fingers, was to look at my own confirmation bias, look at my own unconscious biases and beliefs. I grew up in a place and a time where I was swimming in racism. I grew up getting messages that certain races, Black people and other races, were inferior. Now, I don't believe that, right? See, do you see how my ego, I don't believe that, but the truth is I absorbed it. And if I don't acknowledge that I absorbed it, I'm going to keep perpetuating it, even if I'm fighting against it. Do you hear that? That's what's important. If I haven't worked on my own confirmation biases, my own unconscious biases of this, because of this person's color of their skin, I automatically view them differently. That's the work. It's not calling people out. It's doing that inner work. And then from that place, I start to recognize that I've been part of this systemic issue, right? And then we can say, oh my gosh, because I've had that moment, right? I've been someone that I believed was always, standing for equality, standing for racial, unity. Yes, and there were these unconscious biases and beliefs. And what happened with COVID and the intersectionality of Black Lives Matter, and there's no coincidence there to me, I was able to look at any and all biases that I possibly could, right? Because there's probably more for me to explore, but I recognized that it must start with me. And then I can start recognizing the way that I participated and how I can start being different. And it's mostly energy, right? Am I holding a particular energy? So I know that was a lot, but I think it's important to look at the big issues, because it's nice to talk about spirituality in this ethereal way, but how do we make it useful in the world?
Right. Well, and that's, one of my favorite things is taking spiritual principles like with you and Temple Hayes and Amy and people we've had on, and really take it to the street. How can I use this practically? And for me, I still vote. I still engage in meaningful conversation about politics. I'll still like stuff Obama says. I'll still like stuff other political people say. And I support political figures. I support people I believe in. It's not as though I'm somehow above the fight because I don't believe in the fight. It's not that at all. What I think we're both really speaking to is the role that ego plays, because when I feel my ego, it exists as this layer of protection. It is a very fragile thing. My ego has roles, right? Jeremy is the guy that he's super upbeat and super positive, and he talks on Facebook and blah, 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 right? Those are all roles that my ego has assumed. And when I see something I disagree with, it's 100% awesome to disagree with it. The differentiation is between being productive and, in my experience, where I'm less productive is when I let my ego grab the wheel and drive me into a 45-minute back and forth with someone on Facebook that I'll never meet and I'll never have an impact on. It's not as though my ego going up against him is going to say, yeah, well, you're wrong because of these stats and this fact and that fact. And they say, well, what about this doctor who said this about that? We're not getting anywhere. Right. And that's because I have relinquished my voice to my ego, to the role that I've assumed as someone who ... As a Democrat, this is what I do. And if somebody challenges that, I have to fight.
Right.
That is where I recognize an inherent flaw in the way we're dealing with things, myself included.
Well, and if you go back to, because I didn't quite finish that extreme example with Hitler, right? If people would have started questioning that narrative for themselves and the people in their lives and spoke to that, not against it, right? Because, my guess is there were people that were fighting that system, but that system was just getting stronger. That's that, unhealthy male ego, like dominate, right? And there is a sacred masculine and a sacred feminine. And to me, it's blending those two that creates a new earth, creating, awakening to the truth of who we are, right? And so if enough people were to question that narrative and not buy into that belief, people can only, and this might be too simplistic, but I think we can only harm other people if we believe that they're an other, right? If they're an other, and if there's a narrative that gets created about the other, I think it becomes easy. We see genocide has happened throughout history, and people say that's so horrible. Well, yeah, it's a horror, of course. But if I fight against it, does it work? I end up becoming profoundly simple. What happens if we start standing for love, standing for peace? What if I recognize that love is the truth of who and what I am? And I'm here to bring that to the world. I'm here to radiate that into the world. And as more and more of us radiate that, consciousness shifts. And then that old paradigm of force turns into deep power. And as more and more of us step into our power, it starts to diminish the control that that force has on planet Earth. And, I think it was Deepak Chopra that said, why try peace? Because war hasn't worked. I mean, it just hasn't worked, right? And so war happens on Facebook. War happens at the Thanksgiving table with family members. War happens with calling people red state and blue state, right? And like that, they're wrong because, well, you're from a blue state, so you must believe this, right? So that creates division. And when we step into our true power, as Marianne says, when we recognize our own light, we unconsciously give other people permission to shine theirs.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're talking about. And that, to me, is the deeper solution. And I know, not only do I know it's possible, but I know it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
It's happening in a profound way.
Right. And so much of that rings true for me, and so much of it, it's really coincidental, because I've brought up that Deepak quote before, and I get a lot of pushback because people will say, well, war did work. It ended World War II. Like, we stopped, if we hadn't gone to war, we'd all be speaking German. Right. And it's like, okay, all right. That's obviously true, or maybe true in a hypothetical. But for me, I really don't want to come off like holier than thou, or like, like above anybody, because really this is me like exploring and processing with you. We just happen to be live, but I know like, one of the examples that we talked about with Dr. Jessica Bird Olmsted, I think last week or the week before maybe, but I had two friends who were arguing about politics, and they each, one was on one side of the aisle, the other was on the other side, and they are bickering back and forth, and I'm just kind of there. And I was so tempted on so many occasions to jump in with this or that, or be the smart one in the room or whatever. And they looked at me and they're like, well, what do you think? And I said, you guys are my bros, man. I think you're awesome people and I love you to death.
Yeah.
And instantly diffused the entire conversation, because, I could have gone into all this about Trump and Bernie Sanders and blah, 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 blah. But I felt like, for me, if who I'm here to be is someone of love, someone that reinforces people's value, if I'm here to be with people and help them recognize their own importance and things like that, I'm not going to achieve that through a fight.
Right. And, it's interesting as you're talking, one thing we've never really acknowledged on air, you and I have a really different position on something that is a pretty fierce political conversation.
That's true.
Do you know that you and I have never talked about it?
No, we have.
But I mean, we haven't ever debated it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Right. We heard each other. And what I want to say about that is, it's not that I'm avoiding that. It's that I recognize there's a deeper reality here. And for me, what I want to offer as we move kind of toward the close here, it's like I want to offer what I often say, and that is, life is a great experiment. So our invitation to anyone who's watching right now, go ahead and comment and share. Do you love the way I'm brave enough to say that? What I want to say is that life is an experiment, and would you be willing to try this for 24 hours? Moving from what you're against to what you're for, standing in the frequency of love, recognizing the essential beingness of every human being on the planet, recognizing the power of checking our biases, recognizing the power of questioning, because we didn't quite address how you work with this bias, confirmation bias. We work with it by questioning that. What's my bias about this? What's my core belief, right? I recognized, and I'll just name it on air, that one of my narratives was people were really afraid of Corona, COVID, and that everyone's in fear. And I would literally see people like, doing this with their mask. And then I realized, oh, that's my confirmation bias. There are a lot of people that aren't afraid right now. There are a lot of people that are following the guidelines, doing what they need to do, making informed decisions. But because I had that bias, I could see it everywhere. So the invitation in closing, from my part closing, I'm sure Jeremy has something to say, but for me, it's let's be in this together, and let's try this on and see what happens, because that's the litmus test, right? Is my opinionating creating love and connection, or division? There's no way to answer that question other than the way that I see it, of course, because my confirmation bias is that love is the answer. So share, comment, we're open to it. We're not going to probably debate with you, but I honor you, and I honor that you're watching and that you have chosen this spiritual challenge for 24 hours.
Yeah, I was just thinking, thank you, TJ, for that. That was awesome. I was just thinking how funny it would be if in the comments we're like debating everybody who disagrees with us. The irony. Yeah, and I think I'm excited at this conversation. I feel like I've grown more in the past month than the year prior. And when I think about what I'm doing that's encouraging that growth, it's just being curious. It's being open to challenging my own programming. You know, for a long time, the program that I've been running is that I believe this and I stand up for it at all costs. And what I'm recognizing is that if the result I want is peace and love and openness and fun and joy, that program doesn't always serve that objective. And just by being curious about it and being open to other people disagreeing with me, I've felt like I've accomplished more. And, you know, like you mentioned, TJ, we have a pretty big fundamental disagreement about something, and it hasn't changed a thing in our relationship. And, you know, 5 years ago, I don't know if that would have been true, because I was so identified with ego. I was so identified with this role that I'm here to play that it didn't matter who you were. If you don't believe what I believe, we can't be friends.
Right.
And simply put, this invitation and this curiosity, this genuine curiosity, has been so much harder to be in, and at the same time, easier in the long run. I feel like a lot of people close to me have grown so much by just being open and challenging our programming. And so I'm grateful again for this conversation, for the other conversations we've had around this. And yeah, like TJ mentioned, if you'd like to hear more on this or join the conversation with us, you know, we try and get live, try and go live at least once a week. So if there's something that you'd like to explore with us, let us know in the comments. And if you disagree 100% with us, let us know. You know, we're probably just going to, you know, heart emoji everything. But yeah, still, we'd love the feedback. And I'm really grateful that we had the conversation and that you guys joined us for it.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Jeremy. As always, I love our conversations.
Likewise. Thanks, TJ. We'll see y'all later.